This lecture will cover the subtopic, A New Constitution, and the focus question is, what major disagreements and compromises molded the final content of the Constitution? Many of the 55 men who met at the Constitutional Convention were very prominent individuals, including George Washington, John Adams, and Benjamin Franklin. Men of education and great wealth, they were, in their social status, highly unrepresentative of most Americans. They shared a commitment to a stronger national government and believed that democracy had gone too far. They deliberated in private to ensure free and honest debate, and records of the proceedings were not published until 1840, when all the delegates were deceased. All the delegates agreed there must be a legislature, an executive, and a judiciary in a new national government. The new Constitution would allow Congress to raise money through direct taxes without relying on the state governments for revenue. The federal government would represent the people too. Even delegates who thought democracy had gone too far rejected Hamilton's proposal for a king and House of Lords. Debate centered on how to balance federal and state governments and the interests of small and large states. Madison's Virginia plan proposed the creation of a two-house legislature with a state's population determining its representation in each house. Smaller states who feared domination by the more populous states countered with the New Jersey plan, calling for a single-house Congress in which each state cast one vote. A compromise formed a two-house Congress with a Senate in which each state had 2 members, and a House of Representatives where members were apportioned according to a state's population. Senators would be chosen by state legislatures every 6 years, insulating them from shifts in public opinion. Representatives were elected every 2 years directly by the people. The direct election of members of the House of Representatives was an expansion of democracy, but the government structure created by the Constitution represented a limitation on democracy overall. Delegates hoped to isolate the nation's government from popular sentiments that had alarmed elites in the 1780s. They wanted to ensure that the right kind of men were elected to office. While the people would remain sovereign, they would choose those who governed them from among the elite. They assumed the Senate would be composed of each state's most prominent citizens, and made the House of Representatives quite small, assuming that only very prominent men could win elections in large districts. Neither the president nor federal judges would be elected directly. The president was to be chosen by the Electoral College, or the House, and electors were not voted upon directly either. The Electoral College was an indirect means to elect the president because the delegates did not trust ordinary voters to choose the president and vice president directly. The Constitution is actually quite brief and barely outlines the structure of the national government. It embodies 2 basic political principles: federalism, sometimes called the division of powers, and the system of checks and balances among the 3 branches of the national government, also called the separation of powers. Federalism is the relationship between the national government and the states. The Constitution, compared to the Articles, strengthened national authority. It gave the president power to enforce the law and command the military. It gave Congress powers to impose taxes, borrow money, regulate commerce, declare war, deal with Indians and foreign nations, and promote the general welfare. States were barred from printing their own money or relieving debtors, as they had done under the Articles. But the daily responsibilities of government, such as law enforcement and education, were left to the states. The separation of powers is the way the Constitution is designed to prevent any single branch of the national government from dominating the other 2 branches. Congress enacts laws, but the president can veto them, and a 2/3 majority is needed to pass a law over his veto. Federal judges are nominated by the president and approved by Congress, but they have lifelong terms to ensure their independence. The president can be impeached by the House and removed from office by the Senate. Slavery also sparked debate at the Constitutional Convention. Though the words slavery and slave do not appear in the Constitution affected slavery as an institution. It prohibited Congress from banning the Atlantic slave trade for 20 years, required states to return fugitive slaves to their owners, and stipulated that 3/5 of the slave population would be counted in determining each state's representation in the House of Representatives and the Electoral College. Many of these measures were proposed by delegates from South Carolina, who were fiercely pro-slavery. These compromises about slavery made it more central to American politics and life than ever before. The Constitution allowed the importation of slaves to continue until 1808, when Congress prohibited it. But by then, 170,000 more slaves had been brought to the United States, more than 1/4 of all slaves carried to the country since 1700. The Fugitive Slave Clause gave slavery extraterritoriality. Slavery as a legal condition remained the status of an individual slave, even if that individual entered a free state where slavery had been abolished. The Constitution did not give the national government any authority to interfere with slavery in the states. And the 3/5 Clause gave the white South far more power in national affairs than its free population warranted, allowing it to dominate the House of Representatives and ensure that every president but 4 elected between 1788 and 1848 was a Southern slaveholder.